Friends are reading from the book of Genesis, chapter 9, verses 8 to 17. God said to Noah and to his sons with him, I am now setting up my covenant with you, with your descendants, and with every living being with you, with the birds, with the large animals, and with all the animals of the earth, leaving the ark with you. I will set up my covenant with you so that never again will all life be cut off by floodwaters. There will never again be a flood to destroy the earth. God said, This is the symbol of the covenant that I am drawing up between me and you and every living thing with you on behalf of every future generation. I have placed my bow in the clouds. It will be the symbol of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth and the bow appears in the clouds, I will remember the covenant between me and you and every living being among all the creatures. Floodwaters will never again destroy all creatures. The bow will be in the clouds, and upon seeing it, I will remember the enduring covenant between God and every living being of all the earth's creatures. God said to Noah, This is the symbol of the covenant that I have set up between me and all creatures on the earth. Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Here we are on the first Sunday in Lent. We are reminded by the use of that language that even though we are in the season of Lent, every Sunday is a celebration of the resurrection. Every Sunday is a mini Easter as we gather for worship. And so how fitting that for this first Sunday in Lent, we are reminded of a covenant. We talk about that language in the church and in Faith Journey all the time. We talk about covenants between God and people. We talk about covenants between people, between peoples. We use that covenantal language quite frequently. And covenant is an agreement, a promise, a contract. There are so many different layers to this word, but it is never it is never an idea that is taken lightly. And in this text, we see God after a really crazy story, a story of disappointment and destruction and fear and unknown and endless water. We see God make a covenant with God's creation, not just with one people, not just with one person, not just with one family, but with God's creation. And we talk a lot about the reminder that God sets. We talk about the bow, the rainbow. We think about the beautiful colors that are part of God's very light. Those colors that make up the light that surrounds us, being a reminder of God's covenant with God's creation. And often when we talk about this covenant, we say that God uses the bow as a reminder to us of that covenant. And yes, it does serve as that. But also, in this text, Genesis is clear that God sets the bow as a reminder to God's self. God sets the bow as a reminder to God's self that when it appears, God will remember that covenant, no matter how destructive and hateful and difficult we can be as God's people, as God's creation. God remembers that covenant, and God remembers and is again reminded of God's love for us. That love is ever present in everything that God does, but we know in any relationship that sometimes we have to remind ourselves why we love. And here we see God giving us an example of how to do that. So, on this first Sunday in Lent, what are the symbols that remind us why we love? What are the symbols that remind us of that covenant? And how, as we go through this week, will we see those symbols and be reminded to let God's light and love radiate from us, no matter how difficult that may be? Friends, this week has been difficult for many. We've seen what weather can do throughout the US and in other parts of the world in different manifestations. We know that those struggles are difficult and are seen and experienced by a God who cares and is with us in all of those things. And in that, God calls us to respond to ourselves and to one another with love. What are those symbols that we see that remind us that we are loved and we are called to love? Friends, I invite us this week to see those symbols and to let them do their job. May we let ourselves be reminded that we are loved and called to love. Thanks be to the triune God. Amen.